Hi everyone, the purpose of this video is to work with analyzing our data from our acceleration virtual experiment. So one of the files that you have in Schoology looks like this. This is the actual data from one of the experiments. What you see here is a pink line. This pink line represents the path that a ball took while rolling down a ramp. And I've highlighted it for us. The dots represent the points that the ball passed through at different time intervals. So our time intervals are shown across the top. Each block as you move across represents 0.1. I'm going to say that again, 0.1 time intervals. So here's my 0 mark, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That represents 0.5 time intervals. Down the side, I have distance intervals. So each block down represents 1 distance interval. So for example, if I take this point here, that point corresponds to 2 time interval and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 distance intervals. So the first thing that you're going to do with this is you're going to kind of enlarge it for yourself. And you're going to make a chart of time interval versus distance interval. Okay? Now, where are you going to write that? Well, here's the second file that I've given you. This is an Excel spreadsheet, and you're going to record your distance and time intervals here. The distance ones are already written for you. The time are already written for you. You're going to be filling in the distance ones. Now, you're going to notice that I already have distance intervals filled in. These are fake. I made these up just for the purpose of this video. So I'm going to pause here. I'll give you a chance to work with that data, fill in your distance intervals, and then turn this video back on when you're ready to move to the next step. Okay, now I'm ready to move on to my calculations. Okay, I'm going to be calculating 3 things: the average velocity, the final velocity, and the average acceleration. The average velocity is found by saying distance divided by time. Now, I'm not going to calculate for the first one, the 0, 0 interval, because as you know, if I divide by 0, I get an undefined value. So I'm just going to leave that one be. So I'm going to first start with this one. Now, we can actually calculate this manually, or we can use a formula. I'm going to first show you manually, and then I'll show you how to use the formula. So to do this manually, I'm going to first say this equals, because I have to use the equal sign to tell it that it's a calculation. My distance is 1, and my time is 0.5. So I just hit that in, and it calculates for me that it's 2. Now you can do that the rest of the way down. It'll work fine. Or if you prefer, you can use a formula. To do that, we were going to say equals, again, whatever is in the distance cell divided by whatever is in the time cell. I then hit enter, and it calculates it for me. Then what I can do is copy that cell. I just did Control-C to copy, drag down, and I hit Control-V to paste. Now you might notice that your numbers are not in 2 decimal places. The way I go about doing that is I come up here to where it says number, and then I just tell it to give me the general format. Okay? All right, so I'm going to pause again. I'll let you do your average velocity calculations. When we come back, we'll do final velocity and acceleration. Okay, so now I'm ready to calculate my final velocity and my acceleration. So my final velocity is found by saying 2 times my average velocity. So what I'm going to do in my cell is I'm going to say equals 2 times the column next to it. Now again, if you want to do this manually, you can, and just type in all your different values, or we can rely on the formula. And I'll then Control C, copy, Control paste it down. Now again, I have to alter my number to make sure it's in the right format. There we go. Now before we move on, I want to take a look at this data. Notice that my final velocity keeps increasing, and it's increasing by about the same amount each time, okay, by about between 3 and 4. Okay, so that is one of the things that we talked about, that acceleration causes velocity to increase about the same amount each time. Whereas if I look at distance, distance is not increasing by the same amount. It's increasing by an increasing amount each time. So it increased by 2, then by 4, then by 6, then by 7, then by 9. You get the idea. Okay, now I'm going to calculate my last value, which is my acceleration. My acceleration is my final velocity divided again by the time. So I'm going to use another formula. I'm going to say this equals my cell next to it divided by the time. I hit enter, and then I'm going to Control copy, Control C, and Control V to paste. Now before I move on to my graphs, I want to take a look at this data. And with the exception of the first one, we really have pretty consistent data. Okay, it looks like we've got a lot of increasing, but if we look for most of it, we're generally getting around that 6.5, 6.6, 6.7 range, which, considering that this data is not perfect, does make a lot of sense. Okay, that my accelerations should all be pretty close together. Okay, I'm going to pause it here, give you a chance to finish the table, and then we'll talk about how you're going to make your graphs. So I want to make 2 graphs for this lab, a displacement or distance time graph and a final velocity versus time graph. So the way we make graphs in Excel, it's actually fairly easy. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to be inserting a graph. So I'm going to click on my insert menu just to have that ready. And then what I want is distance versus time. So I'm going to highlight my distance column and then my time column. Now, depending on the version of Excel you have, you can either use this little quick menu at the bottom, or most of you are probably going to come up here to the top. So I'm going to be inserting a scatter graph, and I want my graph to look like this. Okay, I can do it like this, but I want to put the line in. I want it to have the line in. So I'm going to click on that, and there I have my distance time graph. Now, I have to put in some labels here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to give this graph a title. And I want to call this distance time. And then I want to do something with my axes. And what I want to do for my axis is I want to put a label on it. To put a label on it, I'm going to go up here to where it says Add Chart Element. And I'm going to click on that and put in axes title. And I'll be titling my bottom as time. And then I'm going to title my vertical as distance. And then my graph is done. And I'm just going to move it out of the way for now. I then want to make a second graph. And the second graph that I want to make, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. The second graph that I want to make is final velocity versus time. Now this is going to be a little trickier because my final velocity and time are not next to each other, but it's not that big of a deal. So I'm going to highlight my final velocity over to my time, and then I'm going to go back up to my scatter graph, and what I see when I create this is a graph with 3 lines. That's because it's trying to graph all 3, final velocity, average velocity, and distance. Well, my distance is my series 1. We already have that graph, so we don't need it. So I'm just going to delete that line. My second one, this orange line, is my series 2, because my velocity was the second column that I had. I don't want this one either, so I'm going to delete that one as well. Now I'm left with my final velocity. So again, I'm going to click on my title, and I'm going to say that this is final velocity time. I'm going to change this to not be there because I don't need it. And then I'm going to put on my axes titles again. Time and final velocity. Now, if I want to, I can actually get this to tell me the slope of the line. That is actually not something that I need to do right now, but if I wanted to, I could put this in here. I know that it's supposed to be linear, and so it puts that trend line in there for me as a dotted line. Okay. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. The final portion of this is a file that is in Schoology, where it's going to tell you how you are going to put all this together in a report. Have a great day.